Hello and welcome to the latest Safer West Mercia podcast. My name is John Campion and I am the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner. And I'm joined today by some colleagues and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicola Lowery and I'm the Assistant Police Crime Commissioner for West Mercia, working alongside John.
And I work with John and Nicola, and my name's Paul Middlebrough and I'm also an Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner for West Mercia.
So lots of names and lots of titles, but as Commissioner, I wanted to recruit two assistants to support Tracy, my deputy, and I in the work across West Mercia for a number of reasons. And 6 months in now, I think some of it will come out in our conversation. But the primary ones being in a very large force area like West Mercia, 1.2 million people. We need capacity to ensure that we are the voice of the public at the heart of policing. We can not only hear those that want to talk to us, but also engage with those who might not necessarily be wanting to talk, or indeed perhaps feel that they're empowered to talk, have their views heard. But the other element is it's a big area, and I know you guys over the last 6 months have helped Tracy and I cover some of that ground, and I'm never failed to be amazed how big the geography is in West Mercia, whether it be Whitchurch in the north or Whitchurch in the south, the Welsh border, or the border all the way across on the Metropolitan and Staffordshire force areas. And that capacity to help work with that community and ensure that we are serving all of them really important. But if we start off, because I think we don't do these roles out of the mundaneness of activity. It's for a purpose, isn't it? A commissionership and the support that goes with it is about the elements of serving our community. And I'm just interested, 6 months in from you guys, what bits do you enjoy the most? Paul, is there a moment you thought to yourself, that's been really worthwhile to be involved over the last 6 months?
I think I enjoy going out and meeting the community, which means meeting individuals or organisations in the community, largely involved with Worcestershire and Herefordshire, which, as John has just said, is in itself a big area. If it was just those two counties, it's a big area. And it's to go out and listen to what the community are actually saying about the police. It's there to listen as well as the community. It's listen to those organisations who work with victims and help victims, and also who help offenders, because actually we want to ensure that offenders are moving in the right direction and they understand their obligations to society as well. So organisations, people, and I've sort of got a feeling I've lived in Worcestershire and Herefordshire in a sense for a long time, and I have a feeling for those communities, whether it's the demographics or the environment, but the people are the important part of the community. And in this role, I can get out and meet people, perhaps even more so than I have done in other roles I've played in the past.
So what about yourself, Nicola?
Yeah, absolutely. I think similarly to what Paul has said, it's that actually element of engaging with the public, engaging with the community, particularly when we're hearing directly some of my experience of working with victims, of working with survivors, hearing about their experiences, what could be improved, whether that be what's happened in their experience in the police force services, and really try and see the gaps of potentially where our service provision is. We've got some excellent services in place, as I've seen from victim services that you've commissioned, John, and I think it's just about how we can identify what even more we can do. I think particularly the areas of focus that I've focused on are sexual violence, domestic abuse, child sexual exploitation, where we've really looked at, what is taking place in the community and heard from victims directly, and then feeding that back either to yourself, John, or to the wider commissioning policy team. So that's the part I find very engaging and very worthwhile, that we can actually hear directly from services and people in the community. And as you said, I do focus for the north of the force, so it's Telford and Wrekin and Shropshire. And I think it's important to provide that visibility to those areas, both in terms of what the public are feeding back and wanting you to focus on as Commissioner, and equally, I suppose, certainly from the police force, what they are doing and what we can better do to improve that relationship with the public.
If I could just follow on from that, Nicola, I mean, so the other group that I have been meeting has obviously been police officers. And to see the range of different work that they do, whether it's with individuals, with property, is absolutely amazing. The advice that they're giving in polite and very professional way to individuals, really, whether they're on the streets in Worcester talking to a homeless person, or they're talking to a farmer who's just had 100 sheep rustled. It's fantastic the way that they have empathy with individuals.
It often strikes me as Commissioner, the geography, obviously, that I've talked about, but that point you've just made about the range of activity, because one of the things that I've seen from you guys is the element to ensure that the priority list is always never ending, isn't it? But actually getting down to areas that we aren't always getting to, or going more often than perhaps we were able to before. I've really seen that different. Is it what you expected? You guys haven't really, I know that you're both aware of what the Police and Crime Commissioner was, but is joining the Office and Police and Crime Commissioner what you expected?
It is. I think in terms of the community element, I always hoped it would be what it is, that we're able to get out there, really spend quality time with the public, community, police force, and really, should we say, I suppose close that circle really and see what else we can do. But equally, I suppose I didn't appreciate the size of your team as well, John, the excellent breadth of work that you do cover in terms of service provision, governance, and it's just opened my eyes a lot more to what the role of the Police Crime Commissioner does in terms of the breadth of services you provide, and equally the work that you and your team do in terms of policy, the commissioning side. So it's that certainly opened my eyes to really appreciate the breadth of work that a Police Crime Commissioner does.
Because I think and I would understand why, and the role is fairly new in the grand scheme of things, but obviously a role in acting as a governance of the police, Nicola, but in what you've just described in terms of commissioned services, I don't think there is a great awareness in the public that actually I do provide a significant amount of resource for services that support victims. That runs, I think, about £8 million currently, and that resource is outside of the police for very good reason in the most part. And also we run an estates function, and usually here we run the estates for the police. It was an outsourced organisation before, and that finished, so then we brought it back into my office rather than back into the force. And that role of governance plus, I like to call it, is the bit that goes with it.
I think I should have known a lot more about what you did, John, because I was chairman of the Police and Crime Panel, largely when your predecessor was there, but I didn't appreciate in that role, and I don't think the panel appreciated in that role, the depth that you actually go into in supporting, as I've said before, victims and offenders and the general public out in the community. But the other thing that I've found is that the office is a fantastic place to work, and I've been thinking about this more recently. But you've got a young team there who are enthusiastic. They're professional in the way that they operate and support me, and I'm sure John and Tracy and Nick. And there's a huge commitment there. And I think that commitment that they have makes for a commissioner who can really hold the police to account and can also be out there supporting the community.
What would your typical days look like? I know the question's a bit of a loaded one because I don't think there is a typical day, but what would you say is a good day that we'd see as typical? What would it include ordinarily? I
mean, typically I can be, anywhere across, as I've said, sort of Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, or obviously in Hindlip. But a typical day would be either meeting with a victim or a survivor, particularly talking about their experience, whether that be part of individual or a group basis, or meeting with a service. At the moment, I'm really trying to get a good understanding, hopefully, of obviously our service provision, what difference it does make, and then looking to see where we can expand or grow that service, or look at other areas as well, along with meeting with the police force. So it is very sort of, should we say, public facing, which I think is certainly crucial to this role, to really provide hopefully that feedback and information to you as Commissioner.
It's certainly not a 9-to-5 job.
No.
It's a weekend job as well as an evening job in terms of what I'm doing. And I think the themes are similar to what Nicola says. It's learning about what's happening, and that can be learning from people in community and organisations, but it's also learning from the police officers themselves. And it's listening to what people are actually telling you. And I think the other side of it is reporting back so that the Commissioner's office know what's there, and also picking up what's going on in the office. So if I'm going somewhere, I know what the issues may have been and where to pick those issues and what to product. The other thing which I like to do in terms of community is to read online the local newspapers, not the items about the police themselves, but the items about actually what's going on in the community. And if such and such an organisation is doing things, it does give you contacts.
Because that wider community issue I see as a big part of our role as the governance in being, yes, of course, my mission around my Safe West Mercia plan, reducing crime, etc. But it can't be done in isolation, can it? The police can't do it in isolation. It's got to be all of the system, and those community issues are always, either a contributory factor often, or indeed as a result of some of the other behaviour, and understanding it. I agree is key. As I've just said, delivering my Safe West Mercia plan, reducing crime, is at the centre of why we're here. How do you measure yourselves? How do you say to yourself, well, actually, this is the difference, or this is the thing that I personally measure myself about involvement? What's that? I'm trying, I suppose, to get the gratification element. I suppose I'm trying to get out.
I think it's ensuring I always take something away from either a meeting, because as you say, it's sort of a big part of our role is building relationships both with the community and partners, and equally with obviously the police force as well, to hopefully get the best outcomes possible. So for me, I always like to try and focus on, should we say, either ensuring I've learned something or taking something away, and making sure I'm either feeding that back to yourself, John, directly, or the wider team, whether that be looking at policy, particular service that we might either expand, or a new opportunity for commissioning. So I think it's just trying to ensure that we do have some degree of measurable outcomes. Whilst it is great to, attend community events, for example, are a big part of our role as well. And it's, being quite accessible, available to the public, making sure that we are seen as a point of contact if the public need any support or have any ideas they'd like you to focus on as Commissioner. So it's just always ensuring that we're there as someone that is approachable and accessible to everyone, really, and ensure that we try and deliver on some of the feedback and actually ensure some deliverable outcomes as well on what we're being told.
That progress, that actual tangible, not just hearing but doing.
Yes.
And I think it's seeing a group and then reporting back to the group and saying, actually, I can help you with this, or I know somebody who can help you with this, and then following up. And it's getting that commitment from partners to help those groups and individuals.
Yeah, I think it's being proactive as well as reactive, which is that balance, isn't it? I think we can certainly see the police forces moving towards a much more preventative sort of approach, and you can see that in the threads of what partners are trying to achieve. To avoid it getting to a reactive situation where someone was regrettably a victim or in the criminal justice system.
The pledge is one of the drives within the Safe West Mercia plan, is around being the voice of the community at the heart of policing. And you just touched on it then, Nicola, around sometimes it's those that want to talk to us, or the loudest voice that we sometimes hear, but that balancing that out. And I'm just interested in, really from the two of you, around how we mix that up, as it were. Have you got things in your mind over the next 6 months, ensure that we are living that value of hearing everybody?
Yeah, I think, well, certainly the work I've done with your team, John, it's trying to really see how we can tap into different parts of our community, whether that be, for example, we've just done a campaign on violence against women and girls. We've really tried to go out in their community, hear from people in high school through to victims directly that have sadly experienced sexual abuse, to services as well, to actually get their ideas and input on what is taking place in the community, what we can do to change, or should we say change our approach, and what we can do to support victims more widely. And I think as well, it's just trying to ensure that we are hearing from the wider spectrum of community. So one thing we're looking at the moment, as you're aware of, is potentially a youth commission where we can maybe hear from different parts of our community and make sure that we do get that diverse group of people. But I think what I try and do, ensuring that we are in lots of different places in the community, whether that be parish council meetings, whether that be community events, and really just seeing how possibly as well through our services we can hear through victims' voice more and make sure that is captured. So that's certainly a key aspect that I try and push locally within the north of the force particularly, is to make sure that we do hear from a wide representation of views, and then equally make sure that is fed back to you or your team to consider.
Yeah, the wide community, I think it's always important that we look at the community, and that we're not just looking at a static community in that sense. And I was very interested. I was on a Zoom for Stephen Lawrence Day about hate last week, and his brother, who is very much involved in demonstrating and talking to groups about hate crime, was saying that there are some very good people who we consult with, and they've done a great job, but we must always look for other people to actually see how things are developing. We want to see the next generation or the next group of people with issues to come forward. And I think we've got to be aware of that.
You both come from a background of representing the public, in smaller areas in West Mercia, because that's the biggest geography we've got in representation in our part of the world, isn't it? What do you see as the key bits, that skill sets that you saw being
I think,
interchangeable?
As you say, I've been a councillor for 21 years. I was able to lead a council which did actually listen to what people wanted and told them about what we were doing. But I haven't just been a councillor, because I was an officer of a county council, and I think it's looking at the relationship, because they're all looking after involved with the community one way or another. There's partners to work with. So I think encouraging partners to work with us, but encouraging partners to work together and not be precious about their own organisations, because policing a safer community covers all areas of the public sector: education, health, collecting the dustbins. It's all part of it.
It's all part of the society we live in, isn't it? And what about yourself, Nicola? What were the bits that you think the bits that come across?
I think certainly from my background in local government, it gave me a really good understanding, I feel, of the landscape in Telford and Wrekin and Shropshire. I think a lot of the challenges that we face are particularly different in some areas if we compare probably Telford and Wrekin to Worcester, for example. And I think it just gave me a really good understanding of some of the public views, should we say, with regards to crime, and equally I think some of the interactions with different services. So for me, it gave me a really strong foundation to, I suppose, provide that strong voice for the public. Certainly in local government, I felt as though I was quite successful at raising public profile on things that mattered in our community. A particular area that I got involved with as a local councillor was working with victims of child sexual exploitation. For many years they called for an inquiry, and it was providing some voice to that element to make sure that views were heard. So I was seen as someone that was very pragmatic, someone that would listen and really try and ensure that we had action on the issues that mattered to the community. And I think, certainly from the work I've done, it's allowed me to engage with particularly victims and survivors in our community, make them feel very empowered to have their voice heard, and to actually present a platform where I'm able to work with partners to actually voice those concerns to the wider public. And I think it's just given me a great solid journey into hopefully being able to support the work that you do as well, John.
Because that interesting contention of, because not everybody's supposed to agree, are they, in terms of being able to raise issues where there is disagreement or lack of understanding, all those kind of things, and that ability to do that. And I do see that as a role I've got. So some of our roles are directly about governance, some it's about providing services, but sometimes it's also about hearing and understanding. So sometimes in the podcast I asked if you were commissioner for a day. Well, you've got greater access than that. You're assistant PCCs. You get to do it every day. But if there was something that you would say to yourself, well, actually, this is an area where, you know, we've got to redouble our effort. Is there one that you'd pick? Is there one that you'd say, this is the area where?
Well, there are several, but I think an immediate one to pick would be to do with schools. And I would like there almost to be, do we call it an action day or a day, pupils in schools and students had the opportunity to understand the issues of victims and the consequences of offenders, so that they could actually get a feel for the implications of law and order and justice across West Mercia. I think it comes in with the younger groups, primary schools I'd start with, and different approach in each of them, but I think it's there that something could be done, and I think it fits in victim abuse that Nick's been talking about earlier, for younger children to take the whole story through as they grow up and become adults.
What about yourself, Nicola?
I think, as you say, John, a lot of the work we're already doing assistant PCCs, so, you know, we have a great opportunity to feed into to Commission and actually take some of these ideas forward. I think an area that I'm particularly interested in is our violence against women and girls strategy, making sure that the force have a very robust strategy on that front. Obviously, we have the national framework from the government, and it's making sure that actually is delivered locally within our force. And an area that I'm particularly focusing on is around sexual violence. Again, it's maybe looking at more broadly, possibly why some victims aren't coming forward. I think it's something that less than 10% of victims actually come forward to actually take their case formally forward to the police. So it's doing a lot more work, if we could, really, in those areas to understand why people are not coming forward, or maybe looking at prosecution rates, really trying to push that agenda either with the CPS or the criminal justice system, and just trying to really see where we can sort of explore that further to make sure that when people do have the confidence of coming forward as a victim, that they feel supported through that journey and equally hopefully get the outcome that they deserve.
Well, the great thing about that question is that I recognise both the answers. So in terms of, you know, it's good to hear, you know, two quite different but connected subjects, you know, that engagement with the younger people, but the wider issues in society, because that's what it is, isn't it? There's an issue in society that we've got to play our part in.
And I think that's the beauty, isn't it? I think me and Paul probably come at things with different backgrounds, different experience, and I think we can really tap into, hopefully, you know, different aspects of our community and take ideas forward to hopefully ensure they're delivered.
As part of the building of this podcast, we asked the public for some questions, to which we've had some. One of the questions we've touched on it a little is around victims. So just give us an example of around hearing from victims directly, and I suppose an area where you think that's made a difference, I suppose, in the last 6 months. Is there one that you'd pick?
Yeah, so I did a podcast most recently, which will be out soon on our podcast, with a victim of child sexual abuse. I think that was very powerful to hear from that victim about their experience of with the police, obviously going to court, and equally, I suppose there's a light at the end of the tunnel that you can rebuild, that there are excellent services out there to support you if you do decide to come forward. So I think that was a real positive message, hopefully, to anybody that has regrettably experienced any type of crime, any type of victim. So I think that's why it's important, I think, that to do all we can to really promote the impact and equally the outcome for victims in our community.
Another question that we've had was around what do you plan to do around tackling violence against women and girls. And I know, Nick, you've kind of picked up part of the portfolio, but I'm actually interested in Paul in terms of it's in all of our works, as it were, and how do you, not necessarily being a policy lead for it, how do you then see that focus of the particular agenda affect your work?
I'm always concerned that when I speak to some community groups, when they talk about crime in their area, they're interested in, quite rightly, motoring crime and burglaries and some antisocial behaviour. But there is a heads down, and people don't want to listen about violence either within families or specifically against women. And I think there's got to be a change there where the community itself will take some responsibility. And it's a big responsibility because the community, individuals, neighbours know what's happening next door to them on occasions. So when I've spoken to parish and town clerks, it's something that I've tried to stress with them, that it is just as important as some of the physical things that they are dealing with as a town or parish council. It's their people, and they want their people to be safe and well and not be frightened.
I think that's a key bit of another key bit of our role around that engagement with the community in terms of understanding their priorities, absolutely, but also the balancing out about the other things that might not necessarily be that are on their radar, but actually are still important, and to the people that they serve and that we serve. I am really grateful for both of you in your work with myself, supporting Tracy and I in that wider system of police and crime commissioning in West Mercia, and really grateful for not only the capacity that, of course, you brought, the two of you, but more importantly, the way that you do it. Been fascinating to watch because you're both very different and do it in a different way. The mission is still the same, and the execution will be different, but actually that commitment to wanting to not only serve our community but also make that difference is really, really strong. And I'd like to thank you both as well for just joining today and talking about it on our podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If listeners are interested to the work that myself and the deputy and the two assistants that we've just heard from do in the community's name, of course we seek to publicise that work on our social media channels and in local media and alike. And if you put into your search engine West Mercia PCC, my website will come up, and it should all be detailed. And if there is either an issue in your community or something that needs to be highlighted, or indeed you want to have your voice heard, on that same website is all of the contact details of how to get in touch. And I'd like to thank you for listening to this latest Safer West Mercia podcast.